ever had the thought that sometimes you are your own worst enemy? That you're the one who most gets in your own way and not other people? This is G.H. Glade for Coaching ADD and the Stimulus-Driven Brain. Today we're going to talk about some of the aspects of getting out of your own way. And, we all tend to do it to some degree or another. As it's generally understood, getting out of your own way implies somehow pulling aside anxieties and doubts and ego concerns and career pressures and all those mental blocks, not to mention those hypercritical inner voices. The first thing we need to do is understand what our self-defeating behavior is. It's not us messing up or making mistakes, because we're all going to do that. Heck, we're all human. Everyone does dumb things. I put myself on that category big time. We're all going to have times where we make mistakes or bad choices. It's just part of being human. It means your habits and behaviors and feelings and personal problems are stopping you from being successful. You need to change these things so your life will become better. First, recognize them when they're happening. If you notice you're doing something that is that old shooting yourself in the foot, recognize it's there when it happens. Don't let it be this unconscious sort of things. Recognize what triggered it. Get help adopting new strategies. Stay tuned to the end, and I'm going to give you some valuable steps that come from hostage negotiation on how to turn down that inner fire of doubts and fears. I'm a big believer in facing your fears and leaning into it, but this is a specific way, and I'm going to go over the neurology. I'm going to save some of the best for the last, so stay tuned. Perfectionism. It's often a way that can really just keep you from even getting started. Business has a concept called the minimum viable product. And I'm going to use this video platform as an example. I want you to go back and I'll put the link in the bottom. Go back to my first video. It was horrible. The content was good. It's on saving money on medications. The information is all good, but from a production perspective, oh my goodness, it was horrible. But the important thing was to get started, to lean into it. And that has a lot to do with the fact that action and failure are two sides of the same coin. One really doesn't come without the other. What breaks this critical connection down when people stop acting, when they just take failure the wrong way and they say, well, I can't do this. We'll come to that fallacy a little later. Failure is not something to be avoided, but something to be cultivated. So let's have some ways of looking at failure. I like my clients to pull the boogeyman out from under the bed. And a lot of times failures are perception, and it's reflected in that inner dialogue that we all have. The first step in examining failure is ask yourself the question, is it true? Is it true that, I don't get my stuff at work in on time? Is it true that I do bad work? It is the nature of the human animal to focus on the negative. I can get 99 great reviews, and which one do I focus on? I focus on the bad one, of course. And, I work hard to try and shut that out. I'm not always successful at it, but, it tends to make those other 99 go by the wayside. They can say all the great things they want to about me, but it's that one negative that kind of sticks, and I think about it, whatnot. So ask that question, is it true? And if I have 99 great reviews and one bad one, I think the power of that social proof of 99 people saying, I like this, that's pretty compelling in terms of an argument. The second step in that is, do you have any empirical evidence that it's true? Are you getting reports turned back from your boss? Is your boss saying, this work is really inadequate, you really need to step up your game? Are you having anything that really suggests this? Probably not. The third thing is the question of, are people treating you in a way that suggests the truth of this diabolical inner dialogue that is about failure and not living up to things? Do people treat you as if, this guy isn't pulling his weight, and, we'll just avoid him at the lunch counter and just sort of shrug when we see him and turn away? Is there any evidence whatsoever that people treat you in a way that suggests that this is true? I'm guessing probably not. As I said, failure and action are two parts of the same coin. There's a knife maker I like, and he has a YouTube platform as well. His name is Alex Steele, and he's a knife maker. And there's a way of pounding out leaves, whichever, a leaf pattern from steel. And he suggests you make that 100 times, but evaluate each one when you make it. Look, does it have balance? Does it have texture? Are the leaves wide enough? It's that part of action and failure that says, okay, this may not be perfect, but I'm going to examine just how everyone was and try and make the next one better. Perceiving something as a problem can totally defeat us, and we need to embrace those problems. I like the minimal viable product model because it embraces failure and that feedback. And that's simply what Alex Steele does in his evaluation of 100 of the same pattern of ironwork. It means dropping features that don't work, that customers don't find interesting, or focusing the development of one's limited resources on the things that work out best. People get stuck thinking a certain way and unable to be flexible or change perspective in this. We get this thing called confirmation bias. It's a tendency to search for or interpret only things that confirm one's existing idea. And so if you have that confirmation bias, as we all do, it is all the more reason to challenge this, to start putting yourself out there, to lean into it and evaluate things that don't come out perfectly for the next time you're there. One of the important things I find is framing problems as questions. When I first started school, I was poor as a church mouse. I was just out of the military, and at that time, veterans were looked upon very differently. I applied a ton of different places, over 300, and I couldn't even get hired at 7-Eleven. But when I had the thought, I don't have money for school, I moved this problem to a question of, how am I going to get money for school? When we change this to that perspective, then we can take a problem apart. I managed to come up with a lot of support for school, despite not having parents that could kind of pick up the tab for that or help me out when I had returned to school. I wound up stacking up 4 different degrees, including 2 degrees. One from a private Jesuit university. Shout out to Seattle University. My total student debt was $1,500. Just by taking that from a problem perceived as a barrier and making it into the question, how am I going to find money for school? Now, the first part is take apart the question. Let's define the problem completely. When we take a minute or two to define the problem, in doing so, we identify what the problem is about first and isolate Just totally, okay, what is that problem? Is it about us? Is it about something functional? What do I need to do? The next step is actually breaking it down into bite-sized pieces or steps. If it's a complex problem over an extended time frame, you need to have sets of action plans for each of the steps. For me, when I was looking for money for school, I had to ask the question, okay, are there scholarships or grants out there? Are there employers willing to pay my way through education? The problem is I simply didn't have money, and I didn't have cash flow that would generate that. So I had to ask those questions of how am I going to get that? It's often valuable to find similarities. This is a pattern recognition. I love doing this. Whenever you're faced with a problem, ask yourself whether this problem shares characteristics with something else you may have solved. Oftentimes, problems mask themselves within their context, but the root issue is the same. And we may have been there, done that. A problem which shares the same characteristics as something else, you may be able to leverage the solution that you applied to that other problem. Now, we all need to really focus on one part of the problem, is keeping our emotions in check. I take myself back to that time, and I recognize going through a period where I felt just so hopeless about getting a job, about ever being able to go back to school, about potentially living in my car, and what was I going to do about that? But you need to put those emotions in check because they too will block you. They will not let you move forward if you have these paralyzing emotions. And that's part of turning into a question. We can bring on our more analytical side. One of the things that, I come back to is that whole notion of why are we doing this? Why is it important? There's a great writer who has a wonderful TED Talk on the power of why. His name is Simon Sinek. And when we really are at the root motivator for why we do things, boy, it just gives us more energy. When we really keep that in the forefront of our brain, why am I doing this? Why is it important? Boy, it gives us a ton of energy to do those things that we need to do. So let's talk about the I'm not good at doing this as a barrier. I remember having the thought when I was in high school that math, God, I'm just not good at doing this. And the turnaround for me came when I stumbled on a high school math book. This was after I finished high school. And it brought math into a tangible world. It made it a tool that I could use to, measure the rise and run for steps, calculate interest, do all sorts of practical sorts of things. And it unlocked me because I realized that, it's not math that's the problem. It's my belief that, I'm bad at this. Well, hence, don't even try because, you're just freaking bad at it. You won't ever do it well. It unlocked it to the point that one of the ways I made money in college was actually tutoring algebra. And I sucked at algebra in high school. I sucked at all of math in high school. But yet that change in perspective brought on a whole new world that, there's nothing one can't conquer. You have this dichotomy. Either I know how to do things or I don't know how to do things. It's not that we're inherently bad at things. A lot of times we don't know how to do things. Yeah, in high school, my teachers didn't deliver the material in a way that I could wrap my head around. And the advantage now is we have so much at our fingertips in terms of building knowledge. I did it with this platform. I taught myself how to do the thumbnails, how to edit videos. And yeah, these aren't perfect. I strive toward that. I look at each video. But the whole idea of I'm not good at that, and the subtext, well, I shouldn't ever do that, is one of those fallacies. So before I wrap up with that neurological explanation of something that comes from hostage negotiation, I want to ask you to take a moment to subscribe and hit a like if you found the content useful. As always, go ahead and share this information. If you know people who are kind of getting in their own way as well, and you recognize this, gently say, I had the same problem. Here's something that might help. So let's talk about hostage negotiation and some of the things they employ. The hostage negotiators, the people who, they recruit spies, they have a level of communication beyond what I ever learned in graduate school. And one of the ones is Chris Voss. He was an FBI hostage negotiator, and he wrote a wonderful book called Never Split the Difference. And I love this guy. He is freaking brilliant. I advise you read the book. He's just, he literally changed hostage negotiation. But the thing that he tells the family of somebody taken hostage is, I want you to be afraid. I want you to worry. And he reflects back to a study where they had people hooked up to EEGs and, could do some videographing. What happens when we have negative thoughts or negative images, in this case for the experiment, they created that by showing very negative, disturbing images. And they asked people to name their feelings. They found changes in the brain. When they were first seeing them, parts of a structure called the amygdala, they lit up. They just had a high degree of activity. And when somebody else named the feeling level they were having, or they named it themselves, that area in the brain quieted right down. So if you're approaching a difficult situation, I want you to accept that you're going to be afraid, or accept whatever negative feeling. Name it to yourself. Hey, this is really scary. And you will be surprised at how this calms you down to do that. I ask a lot of my therapy clients to lean into problems. And I know they're going to feel anxious doing that, but I need them to take that step to realize that they can overcome. And it helps build resiliency. And having them just name that, yeah, I'm going to be afraid. I can do these hard things. That changes what your brain does. Now, the other parting thought I have, and this is a quote that a lot of different people are named as making that quote, but the harder I work, the more luck I have. Nothing takes the place of just plain working hard at this stuff. Working hard at trying to, silence those inner diabolical voices in our inner monologue. Working hard to achieve, for example, a better video. All these things, they bring on more luck. Luck, I'm not a believer in luck, but I'm a believer in putting ourselves both in the way of opportunity, and we do that by working hard at what we want. So, in parting, this is G.H. Glade for Coaching ADD and the Stimulus-Driven Brain. My hope is that you join me in further episodes by subscribing. The link is down below. And most of all, I want you to share this. Take care and have a good day. Bye-bye.